Again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we're excited to hosting this presentation and discussion with our first ever Zine Residency resident. So before we begin tonight's program, I think I want to provide some context on how this residency came about. First at AAA, we have a relatively big zine and artist book collections there in the basement, and you're welcome to always make an appointment and come back to browsing these books. And we believe zine making as a medium for artists and alternative art practices is very important. That's why we also have been continuously growing our collections of zines and artist books. So these 5 residents tonight were selected through a competitive open call, and then they each created a zine that respond to our digital and physical collections at Asia Art Archive. So each zine approached our collection from a very different perspective, and then you're gonna hear about their zines and then their process of making these zines tonight. So I made their bio very short. The full bio is available on our website. The first person who's gonna present is Lulu Yao Gioiello, who is an artist and creative director of Taiwanese and Italian descent with an interest in contextualizing and regenerating personal story. And she's also the founder of Year, a curated book series and platform aimed at broadening perspective of Asia through image, person, idea, and history. Also, one thing to mention is we displayed all the zines that made by these residents over there. So after we finish the presentation tonight, feel free to stay and browsing all these books. So the second resident is Jennifer Tobias, who is a scholar and illustrator. She was also the co-author and the lead illustrator for Extra Bold, a feminist, inclusive, subversive, non-binary field guide for graphic design. And she recently completed a residency at the Bard Graduate Center library on the subject of applied arts training programs in New York City from 1800 to present. And then the next is WANG Yefeng, who is a transdisciplinary artist and researcher based in New York. He works with video animation, sculpture, installation, and writing. He has been awarded solo exhibition at Macmillan and also did residency at International Studio Curatorial Program and MacDowell. And then finally, we have Alchemyverse, the artist studio based in New York. The members, Bi Chen and Yi Xuan, they combine craft and research through their respective backgrounds in visual art and sound study. They are a recent alumnus of Leadership Camp at Asia Art Archive in America, and currently they're in residency at IACP in New York. So our moderator for tonight is Yayoi Shionoiri, an art lawyer who supports artists. She serves as executive director to the estate of Chris Burden and the studio of Nancy Rubens. She currently serves as a board member of Asia Art Archive in America, a consultative council member to New Japanese Art Fair and Tokyo Gendai, and an advisory panelist to the Serpentine Gallery's Legal Lab. So welcome everyone, and then we're going to start with Lulu.
First, I wanted to thank the Asia Art Archive in America for giving me the opportunity to create a zine alongside some other talented artists. I'm excited to share my experience with you, and thank you all for coming. In 2018, I started Far Near, a cross-cultural book series that broadens perspectives of Asia through image, person, idea, and history. It's printed as I wanted the work to be more permanent and tangible. My hope is that the books can act as an archive for contemporary Asian creativity and thought. Even though these books exist physically, I do a lot of correspondence with collaborators and readers online rather than in person. Space, time, distance, social anxiety, and most recently the pandemic are all barriers when it comes to making and maintaining a community. I have found myself, maybe idealistically, yearning to either find or create a community of people who I can relate to and be inspired by in real life. A collective to me seems to fit these needs. Before starting this project, I'd been learning more about Godzilla, Basement Workshop, and other Asian American collectives that formed in the 70s and 90s. It was inspiring to learn how these grassroots communities came together as a response to and in spite of their environment. I was also reading more about the exchange between Indian and Japanese artists at the turn of the 20th century, who were looking to counter the Western canon with an establishment of a Pan-Asian movement. I was specifically interested in the relationship between Rabindranath Tagore and Kazuo Okakura, two writers that subsequently spoke admirably and critically about each other's culture. From there, I became more curious about bridging the gap between then and now and here and there. I decided to research the many other collectives that have helped us arrive to where we are today, even if we don't always realize it. I started by searching the Asia Art Archive collections for more information on collectives I already knew about, as well as terms like group and, of course, collective. Maybe serendipitously, one of the first results was from the Autolith Group, a London-based collective founded in 2002 that approaches curation as an artistic practice of building intergenerational and cross-cultural platforms. Their catalog, Xenogenesis, and their film, O Horizon, is actually based around a poem by Rabindranath Tagore. The poem reads, "Today in 100 years, who are you sitting reading this poem of mine, filled with curiosity today in 100 years?" I feel like this really strongly mirrors the goal I was trying to reach with the zine, to see the interconnectedness not only between artists from different times, but also different cultures, disciplines, and approaches. I wanted to see the impact we can create when working together and off of each other. As I continued my research, to be honest, it started to feel a little overwhelming and endless. While I had initially been thinking of formatting the zine as a book or a poster, I realized I didn't want to make something that felt finite or conclusive. There was no way I'd be able to learn about and include every Asian artist collective since the beginning of the 1900s. Eventually, I decided to format the zine as a deck of cards. Index cards are something I obviously use a lot, and I often revisit Brian Eno's oblique strategies for inspiration. Chronological order felt like the most progressive way to organize the cards, so the user could see the cross-cultural movements in certain periods of time. Assembled in the margins is a personal index and research project. Although the physical set consists of 141 cards, I have also created a public online index that will be added to periodically. The cards are housed in a pine box and wrapped in a furoshiki, with a small pen if the user wants to add to the blanks at the end of the deck. So how did I choose who went into this deck? I defined Asian artist collectives as any group of people, 3 or more, who gather, help, and influence the larger population to challenge traditional approaches to art and identity. Their shared aim is to make space for new visions, aesthetics, and possibilities, to better the global stance of Asian art and thought makers whose ideas are so often lost to history in the margins. I categorized each collective by year, location, focus, and type. Some are political, some are experimental, and some are just there to exhibit each other's work. Here's an example of 3 consecutive cards from 3 different countries. We can see the political backdrop of post-World War II and the Cold War, giving rise to a collective rebellion against former powers. Here's another example. We can see the diversity of each collective's purpose. One is official, one is unofficial. Some are straightforward, while others are intentionally vague. I also find Beijing East Village a fun example of cross-subcultural influence, in which Beijing-based artists took inspiration from New York's East Village, to me most significantly, in the way they came to an end, which was by being arrested for cooking naked in their front yard. This is the online index that accompanies the card deck. I would like to encourage collaboration with a wider public by making the project available for anyone to view, edit, or contribute to by filling out a Google form. This project brought up a lot of questions for me. How can we sustain collective action? What purpose do they really serve, and can they survive today? I think there are definitely limitations. I think of collectives as rock bands. They form, they break up, they reform, members go solo. And besides the Rolling Stones, no band has lasted forever. Collectives don't either, at least not in their original formation. During this process, I spoke to Eleanor Young, one of Basement Workshop's founding members, and came to see how collective action builds new relationships, networks, and programs that may not have been possible if it had just been one person working alone. But I also see now how they can eventually come to an end as passion dies down, emotions accumulate, and differing interests prevent clear ways forward. Still, it's worth mentioning that the collective action of Basement Workshop birthed Godzilla, MoCA, the Asian American Dance Theater, along with many programs, publications, and studies on the topic. So when asking how we can sustain collective action, I think it's important to acknowledge that collectives are not meant to last forever, but they can make an impact to be felt for over 100 years. When asking what purpose they serve, we should look at how the people around us make us feel, how they can excite or encourage us to do something different. It takes a lot of effort to bring people together, a lot of effort to maintain those relationships, and even more effort to make real positive change together. This zine is a thank you to the people who put in that effort.
Hi, and thank you for coming. My name is Jenny Tobias, and the zine I made is called Asia Art Archive in the Cloud. There are copies over there. This is what it looks like. My background is in scholarship. I'm a librarian, and I had heard about Asia Art Archive a while back, and I didn't quite get it in terms of, like, it's got 3 locations, some of it's digital, some of it's analog. That's not unusual, but to have all those things spread across 3 different locations around the world with different levels of copyright access was interesting and unusual. And from a point of view of a librarian trying to explain it to people, kind of quirky. So it was a wonderful opportunity to learn more about how it really worked. And then my challenge became, well, how can if I had to explain this to somebody, how would I do that visually? And so I came up with the metaphor of the cloud being the cloud, the internet cloud, but also, like Lulu was saying with collectives, information that sort of, comes together and flows apart and has its own trajectories, and that makes things interesting for researchers to explore. So I started with you can't see it, but there's a map of the world's time zones going across the spread. And so on the front, you see the locations proportionally of New Delhi and Hong Kong, and then Brooklyn's way over here on the back. And what I did is there's 42 research collections, so I focused on those. That's meaning archival material, primary source material, the really good stuff from a librarian's point of view. And so I gave everybody their own little cloud. Simple. So, and then I also made extra little clouds for the way the collection is organized also involves this vocabulary of keywords, and I wanted people to cue into those. So I made a little cloud for the keywords. So this is sort of an example. And then I organized them spread by spread, sort of over the world map of time zones, which you can't see, but you can see maybe up at the top, Greenwich Mean Time is up there. And then as you go across eastward to the east, different time zones light up to show you sort of how the different collections are grouped geographically, even though we know that geography is arbitrary and that in fact everyone's mixing it up all the time. I had to draw the line somewhere. So you'll see there's some more keywords floating around. And then my librarian got in and said, okay, I got to show people the database. So, and it's a little hard to understand. Sometimes there's different ones, there's different things going on. So I gave that a cloud too, and tried to just make that, just give people a sense of what the thing looks like, so that if they do decide to explore the collection, they'll have some sense of where they're going. And so I did that, and then in the end, I brought it back home here. So 23 Cranberry Street was just a delight to discover as part of through the residency. Again, like I knew about the archive intellectually, professionally, but it was such a joy to come here and meet the team and enjoy this beautiful neighborhood. So I wanted to share that with people too, and concluded with links to the events program and the pleasure of being here with you tonight. Thank you.
Well, it's with my great pleasure and humbleness to be here today. My name is WANG Yefeng, and the title of my project is called Archetypology. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about myself. I'm an artist who uses media such as 3D animation, installation, and writing in my works. And as you can see in the pictures, I work with playful moving images and whimsical characters that confront and mock stereotypes and cultural myths. My practice concerned the areas such as the self-becoming in relation to the idea of in-betweenness, the scrutiny of the fixed identity formations and racialization, and the investigation of the contemporary technological condition in the context of the global capitalism. So I think these interests are really just largely informed by my transnational experience. But today we are talking about zine, artist zine, and archive. So I'd like to share my 2 cents about these things too, particularly in relation to technology. Now, what is an artist zine? In my opinion, a zine, both printed or digital, is a form of technology, a technique that supports and manages idea and memories. Same as a paper, like my paper here, a book, an album, a hard disk, a smart device, etc. It takes care of things and tells stories. What is an archive? An archive is an organization, a technique that supports and manages ideas and memories. A host of index, collections of books, PDFs, historical documents, photos, etc. It takes care of things and tells stories. I just repeated myself there. So there's actually a French philosopher, Bernard Stiegler, had a brilliant term that can be applied to our situation right here called the tertiary retention. Some also call it the tertiary storage. It is a technical form of storage that constitutes an imprint of our memory. It often contains high-capacity data and moving parts. And I would say if one is willing, it can have a self-reassessing mechanism, so it is also an ongoing act of becoming. Right there is actually Mr. Stiegler. He has an interesting story that he was imprisoned for bank robbery at a young age. A lot of you must know that story. But I think it is a funny anecdote, but probably inspired his later theories a lot, as in a prison cell, you are basically being stored, right, but without any freedom to leave at your free will. So the next one here you're seeing, the reason why I brought up Stiegler is his writing was actually crucial in leading me to Yuk Hui, the Hong Kong writer, who inspired my AAA project, because these two are very close to each other. And last summer, I spent several weeks right here at AAA, researching Yuk Hui's discourses. One of his books, titled On the Existence of Digital Objects, published in 2016, caught my attention. The book investigates the potential technological progress that could be understood as a process of the materialization of inter-objectivity relations. It is also a proposal to connect the abstract meditative individual in the digital milieu to a concrete new system. So in short, it is basically a proposal to, it is a temptation to probe new imagination and interconnectivities in the epoch of technology. And right there is actually a mind map I did during the process of my research. I don't know if you can see clearly, but it's in the zine over there. It's basically an imagined computational network as an autonomous organism. So this is another research map, research join called AND. I'll flip to the next page here. So because such kind of system actually pays a lot of attention to the word "and," right? We have these very familiar term called art and technology, virtual and reality, data and affect. I think in a way, if you want to understand it well, then you have to, understand what the "and" means, right? That's just a couple of other research drawings. What is digital objects? I think I'm going to skip this part. So going to the next one, such discourses laid the conceptual foundation of my AAA project. First of all, it is a work coherent with my own research genealogy. But at the same time, there's another strong drive behind it, which is since the viral and the social turmoils in 2020, the probing of new imaginations for our culture, identities, communication, and the technology that has been an urgent task. Honestly, I think we are still trying to make sense of this new world we are situated in right now. Okay, so under such a condition, our topology tries to build a digitally driven, open-ended, non-arbitrary, and a non-hierarchical collaboration. It blends 3D animation, writing, and online conversations, and showcases the outcomes of collaborating with creators found on digital marketplaces. These digital creators were approached and commissioned by me to make 3D portraits of myself. They were based in Estonia, Indonesia, India, Mexico, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, etc. And the basic process is, besides one blurry photo, I provide no other information in the service, quote unquote, very important. I requested. And the results were an array of digital avatars derived from a single source, but full of unpredictable discrepancies, infused with each creator's own subjectivity, locality, personal narrative, etc. And as you can see in the picture, actually, that's a rendering of how I imagine the work will be installed in an exhibition space, and it's literally transformed into a mind map. So for materializing such a network of diversity, my regular creative mode needs to be reassessed as well. In the process, I learned to become not just a sole creator, but also as a traveler passing through the digital milieu with a pair of curious eyes, a trader who does not make any assumptions for his forthcoming exchanges, and an archivist situated in the morphing network. Then the art zine, as an important component of the whole project, becomes a treasury retention that documents and manages the whole process. So I know you guys have been waiting. That's my zine, finally. Sorry. So finally, the zine includes the material of the collaborations and as well as references that pay tribute to Yuk Hui, who's in collection in AAA right here. You can find him on the bookshelf. It proliferates the research by making the content more accessible to viewers through an easy-to-distribute medium. So the development of the zine actually during the residency period also brought me great joy, because I worked together with this brilliant graphic designer, Wei Bing Chen, in Guangdong, China. His studio's name is called Tagging Design, and our collaboration was also executed through the internet solely. But many great ideas emerged during our online discussions. For example, you can see here, we developed a unique index system for the zine. So if you look carefully, the whole zine doesn't have any page numbers, but it's encoded by each collaborator's name and their mother language. In some other pages, some pages just objectively document our online conversation, unedited. Now, finally, I would like to conclude with another quote from Yuk Hui, as I think it intertwines our discussion on technology and archive pretty well. Nowadays, many institutions have established significant digital libraries. Digital objects are ubiquitous, just we can't fully comprehend them yet. So what happens to the concept of archive after this, after this digital turn? And what is the new power structure that needs to be examined? And in this new setting, a direct quote, what are we archiving and for what are we archiving? Another direct quote from Yuk Hui, we are archivists, since we have to be. We don't have choice, this decision is already made or determined by the contemporary technological condition. The ubiquity of information in digital, calculable forms has created a new situation of work and exploitation. We entered an endless process of data production, and then we also enter an endless black hole of data navigation. End of quote. So in this manifesto, I think for the writer, the main economical and political question concerning the digital is one of archives, right? And the key seems to be personal archives in order to create another digital/technological culture. And that's why everyone needs to be an archivist. Well, this is certainly one of the goals of my project, Avatar Topology, and at the same time, I think it's crucial for institutions who hold the data to rethink their relation with each individual. For example, their visitors, their researchers, and artists like us. And at the same time, for the individuals to reimagine their relationship with the institutions. If we think things like a zine or an archive is a tertiary retention, then they are not supposed to be prison cells for books and documents or data. They should be celebratory frontiers for meaningful and risky ideas. So I really think the Zine Residency at AAA in America is one of the better experiments to push the frontier forward by creating such a productive platform with rich and accessible resource for us artists and researchers, and made our voice being heard. So appreciate, thank you, and thanks for listening, everyone.
Hello, everyone. We are Alchemyverse, an artist duo currently living and working in New York City. I'm Yixuan Xiao, and this is my partner, Bicheng Liang. We are honored to be a part of... Oops, sorry, that was super loud. We're really honored to be a part of the inaugural Zine Residency program, and very excited to share with you our project, Terra Nullius, a bibliography of lava. Before we get into the actual project, we would like to share a little bit about our artistic interests. Our practice is about the process of transformation, researching places where geologic time has taken its effect on the environment, the people, and the material culture. We are drawn to the field because the experience in those sites help us understand our relationship with the concept of deep time. Tools such as 3D scanning, spatial audio, and casting, molding enabled us to engage in the excavation and recalibration of forms of geologic artifacts. And it is through these processes that involved both new and old technologies, we begin to make work that channels between the distant past and the fleeting present. Which brings us to the project here at the Asia Archive in America. It was inspired by the conversations we had here about the permeating borders around Asia and how the fabrics of the contemporary temporality and the contemporary life is stretched. And with this in mind, we focused the theme of the zine on lava, both as a material that actively changes human territories and reorganizes the geosphere, and also as something that resembles the precarity, porosity, and elasticity of the archive. We wanted to play with the allegory between lava and archives within the format of a zine, and create a reading experience that unfolds into multiple dimensions. The book features a laser-engraved topographic structure, and this was derived from our earlier fieldwork in the Kilauea volcano earlier in 2022 at the Mauna Loa volcano. And we were trying to record the subterrestrial frequencies of magma movement near the erupting crater. So at the time, we had found this crevice that almost perfectly fit our this handmade microphone. So the physical character of the area where the lava has frozen created this opportunity or this channel for us to capture the event that is happening both very much presently and currently, but also from the effect of what is very ancient for us. And so using 3D scanning and digital rendering, we were able to capture this mesh structure based on the algorithmic pathway of which the machine memorizes the environment, which became what you saw earlier, the mesh structure. And to the other side of that page, there are texts written by us based on the sciences of lava from 11 citation sources. And they come from a variety of sources,
from scientific database to Encyclopedia of Volcanoes to the online database of Asia Archive in America, and also from our own field work in Hawaii. And all together, they begin to form this network of knowledge around lava and its memory. I want to mention that the cover design is inspired by the collections at AAA-A, where the numbers representing the amount of folders and items in each of its collection at the moment of our residency. And the whole book together, folded together, is stored in this vintage geologic sample bag. Yeah, and that's it. And that's our website and social media if you want to know more about the supply. And thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for each of your presentations. That was awesome. Again, thank you artists, artist collectives for both your practice as well as your presentations today. Huge thank you to Furen, who's right over there, as well as Christina and the rest of the Asia Art Archive in America team for working so tirelessly with our residents and on our public programs in general. Thank you, Jane, and the rest of Asia Art Archive in America for being the space in which we find ourselves today, where we're sharing community today. And thank you for all coming out today in the rain and making time. I know there's always so much going on in New York City, particularly in the art world. I know there's a lot of things to take in, a lot of people to support, and so it's really great that we're sharing an opportunity to be in conversation today. A little bit about me. My name is Yayoi. I'm a proud Asia Art Archive in America board member. I'm an art lawyer that supports artists, and I'm in particular very interested in the idea of zines as a possibility of change making, as a form of potential protest, and as a form of pictographic advocacy. I think for me, in particular, artist zines coming out of the Hong Kong protests in 2019 and 2020 in particular were something that was very interesting for me to experience both digitally and in real life, particularly because it was the height of the pandemic. It was hard to know what was coming out of that region, and to be able to experience what artists and protesters and organizers were experiencing in that format was very interesting for me. So I want to focus a little bit on each of our incredible artists and artist collective, and perhaps we'll go in order of the presentations that we heard today. Lulu's smiling because she knows she's up first. Lulu, your zine really is an object. You're really, in some ways, pushing the idea or definition of a zine. Of course, thank you, Frank, for providing your own definition of what you thought a zine is. But I think in some ways, Lulu is pushing the physical materiality of that. So talk to me a little bit about the title of your zine. You have the subtitle, An Inexhaustible Index of Asian Art Collectives. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, some people here actually know how many titles I went through before I came to this one. But I really thought the subtitle would be important because also, like, when I started this project, I realized I'm not a historian, I'm not like a real archivist, so this is something that's personal to me. And really, the ones that I chose to include were not only ones that I found while I was doing the residency, but also ones that kind of resonated with me. So that's why I use the word inexhaustible. I just think it's kind of like an endless thing that is going to continue to be added to, especially since, you know, we're living in today, and today there's probably like a few collectives being formed somewhere in the world. And then as far as the title goes, I kind of wanted to mix both how I was researching and how the collectives themselves gather. So assembled in the margins, they tend to find a place that's inexpensive, so a basement, a abandoned building, a chicken farm, a former slaughterhouse, But also, in order for me to find these collectives, it's not like they're in a standard textbook or readily available to find. So I kind of felt like that would resonate with me for the title.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and thanks for that. I also loved in your presentation that you were talking about collectives almost like rock bands, right? This idea of fluidity, like each and every person is talented in their own way, and at a particular time and moment, like a band comes together for whatever reason, and there's this like incredible collective energy where like the sum is greater than each of its parts, but for whatever reason, a time comes when they move on. And I sort of thought that was very interesting, and it almost, to me, feels similar to the way to experience your zine, because each of your zine moments are in this card format. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because you kindly put together your research in chronological order. And so when you open this incredible object, you have this ability almost of like going through how Lulu decided to chronologically put these collectives together, and hopefully you all will get to experience it because it's right over there. But I guess what happens in your mind? What happens if like somebody decides to like use the deck in a different way, or like the chronological order gets like messed up somehow? Like, what would you feel about as an artist about that?
I know it's scary because it's like in perfect chronological order, but I also kind of like the idea of it being more playful and picked at and played around. I think like cards in general are known, or you shuffle them, you as a tarot card you can pick one out of whatever. So I want people to mess with it if they want, and if they really want to be OCD they can put it back in chronological order. But I also think it like kind of cards mimic collectives where they can be playful, serious, change, shuffle around, and they're personal. So I felt like, you hold on to the cards that you have, and like sometimes it's like your deck.
And I appreciate you saying that because apparently, thankfully, the artist has told you that you can go ahead and mix up the order of the cards. So we now have this agency to do that, which I love very, very much. And then I guess sort of the final question is, your zine as object to me feels like a Japanese tea bowl. Because it's in this beautiful pine box, and there's an inscription on the box that kind of has the provenance or tries to describe what it is. And then it's like you open it, there's this wonderful experience of unfolding and experience, which I think is really quite beautiful. How did you come to choose the objects that formed your zine as object?
I definitely started with the card deck itself, but then I realized I didn't want it to just fall apart and disappear into like the rest of the environment. I wanted it to feel kind of like a personal treasure, so it can be displayed if you want it to be. But also I think the furoshiki obviously, goes back into like the Asian subject, but also shows my personal attachment to it because I hand-tied everything, hand-stamped everything, so it kind of resonates as a personal item versus just like something that's made by a machine. And thanks for that, because that actually is a very interesting contrapoint to the fact that you have a digital version of this object, so it's an intangible object that people can also add to, which I think is kind of this, it has like another dimension that's not just physical as well. Okay, so then let's turn then to Jenny, who's like further on down the line. Hello, hi. Thanks for your patience. So Jenny's zine, I think I think of it as a didactic tool. So it's like this. It's almost like this research tool about research. So it's kind of this like strangely meta thing. And the fact that you are a librarian and a scholar, I think makes it kind of, that for me clicks why perhaps you kindly decided to use your talents and skills to produce what you did. What is your intended audience for the zine?
Researchers. see a collection that's wonderful, unique, growing, dynamic, and needs people to come and use it. And is also unusual and maybe a little hard for people to wrap their heads around. So that was my idea. Is coming as a librarian, I worked a lot with grad students, scholars, industry people, and that sort of introduction, that sort of bringing people in, was the person I had in mind.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because in your presentation you were saying, that Asia Archive in America, you kind of felt like maybe people wouldn't necessarily get what we do here. And that's a very interesting thing to hear from a scholar, right? Because as a nonprofit institution, I think we want to be able to say to everybody, this is what we do, please come visit us. And that's why we're here. Like, our raison d'etre, our mission is X, Y, and Z. I think it's so important for nonprofits to be able to say that. And yet, what in some ways Asia Archive in America does is so tentacled that it's actually quite difficult. And until you all, for example, make the time to come in the rain all the way out to some part of Brooklyn that may be far for you to come to, it's actually hard to, I think, experience what this all is. And so, Jenny, after spending time at this residency, I guess, what sorts of things did you get from your experience, and what were some things that surprised you about Asia Archive in America, if anything?
Wonderful. Well, there was much to explore, just that it seems to me archive that's doing work that is not being done sufficiently elsewhere in the art world. I'm not an Asian scholar. I don't read Asian languages, so I can't speak from that kind of expertise. But just as an art researcher and librarian, you can see where traditionally there's been areas of neglect, and especially now, just that the world is so exciting and exploding, and that there is all this material there that's endangered or needs some love. It just seems like, however you guys are doing it, it just seems like a really worthwhile enterprise.
As a full disclaimer, we did not pay Jenny to say this, and we also did not plant that question, but thank you so much for saying that. That's awesome. Let's talk a little bit also about your title. So Lulu, we talked about Lulu's title, but let's talk about Jenny's title. Obviously, in a good way, a double entendre, right? As you talked about, Jenny, in your presentation, AAA has physical locations, and we also have digital locations. And so obviously your double entendre is about the cloud, of course. But what do you think about the term in particular, I think, that you chose to kind of, I guess, put your hand on? Like, what was it that you were like, cloud is the thing for you?
Honestly, it wasn't that deep. I mean, you kind of nailed it. It did. When I came to the idea of the time zones and just the idea of sort of the planetary and the idea of weather systems, that it just kind of made sense. Yeah, it wasn't really that deep.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Okay, so let's turn to Frank. Thanks for your patience. And by the way, as Jane reminds you, please make sure you all have questions too, because I'm not the only one who's going to be asking questions here. Right, Jane? We want people to ask questions. But Frank, let's move to you. As I heard about your presentation and learned more about your zine, I would characterize what you are attempting to do in some ways as you're trying to use the archive really as a medium or a jumping off point for your practice in a particular kind of way. And so I guess for me, I wanted to ask you, what was it like doing research at Asia Art Archive in America about Yuk Hui? What were some, did you find what you needed to learn? Or did you even know what you were looking for as you were doing this research?
Well, I think I came here without knowing I was going to make this zine. So I think the environment for me is like a network, and an autonomous one, with a lot of unpredictabilities and flexibilities, I would say to my peers that my zine was the one that looks most like a traditional book, and my production was greatly postponed because of the pandemic situation in China. because my books, I'm printing 100 editions of the book in China. So basically, if you're in a class, my project is a failure, you know. But I absolutely just love how the folks here, the organization and the staff, Jane, how flexible they are with me, you know. And I first came here, was just really want to get to know more about what the hell this, Yuk Hui guy is talking about. And I started talking to, Fu Ren. I really want to give her credit because she was the one that actually encouraged me to start making my zine. And that was unknown before, and I really appreciate that. So everything just kind of like unfolded, and I got to meet my peers. I learned tons from them. It just has been a great experience.
We also did not pay Frank to say that either, but thank you for that. And I guess I will point out that our residents had very little time to do their research and to produce each of their zines. And the fact that each of you all completed your zines, maybe not perhaps in the format that you would like, Frank, because of supply chain issues, but you are in front of everybody here after only spending a very short amount of time working. Here you are presenting your work. And so I do want to acknowledge that, that is incredible, that it was such a short amount of time in which each of these artists and artist collectives came up with their research idea, did the research, and actually produced something extraordinary and creative. Frank, in your presentation, you defined the zine and the archive, and you had very similar definitions, probably on purpose, for at least part of the presentation, where you were talking about saying that zines and archives are techniques, right? So they're networks, they're techniques, they're some sort of tools that supports and manages ideas and memories. And so for your project of Topologies, whose story, ideas, or memories are you telling?
Well, that's a really good question and a big one, I think. First of all, I have to be honest that, of course, I stole a lot of ideas from these writers and then my inspirations I talked about, in the talk. And one of these things I said in the talk was how to remove myself from this intimidating, position as the sole creator, And like when I was talking to these online collaborators, they taught me so much, and at a certain point, there's no way that not involving their really personal things. Like this creator from Sri Lanka, he was telling me about this beautiful place called Sigiriya. They call it the Lion Mountain. I've never been. I looked at it online, and it's just astonishing enough. So all these stories actually went to the zine. So I think it's actually, my goal is to create this actor network of all these things come together.
Thanks for sharing that. Did you happen to, have you kept in touch with any of these other creators who in some ways were hired for their skills?
Well, the plan is actually a big part of the portion of these zines. The reason why I wanted to print 100 copies is I will need to send them a copy to each collaborators once it's done. And some experience is, we used to keep chatting, and one thing I feel really happy is they actually appreciate, this experience as well, because, they said I'm one of the most flexible clients, just let them do whatever they want. And to me, that's just an important way to bypass this, exploitation on the digital marketing tools and social media tools. That's really my, one of my goal, I guess.
And that's very interesting, too, because as I understand it, these creators throughout the world offer their services on these platforms, right, like Fiverr or what have you, and they have to pitch themselves to clients, right? They're providing services, so in some ways it's a very transactional relationship in this very capitalist way. But it's great to hear that you're, as fellow collaborators and artists, you intend to sort of honor that relationship that you've made with them. That's really quite neat.
Thank you.
And then the final question for you is, how do you position your zine in relation to this larger project of topology? It's hard to say.
I don't know. I guess that's for the visitors to find out.
Got it. Awesome. Okay, so now last but certainly not least, Alchemyverse, thanks for your patience. So your work I think of as really zine as an allegory. And it was really exciting for me to learn more about your overall practice too in your presentation. Like that actually for me really helps to contextualize the specific zine project that you kindly did for Asia Archive in America. But let's talk about lava formations and archive formations, right? So for you, in what ways is the lava a nature's archive? And how is that similar or different to archives? Oh, it's time for us to leave, apparently. That's not bad. So compare for me sort of lava as nature's archive versus archives, and like how would you compare those two things?
Yeah, I think it's really wonderful that you actually brought that up and you sort of put it in words exactly what we wanted to achieve with this little thing, this zine. I think that was the initial question that we brought with us entering the conversation with Arun, with the staff and the archive here, is that how do we bring the field into the archive, and what does an archive feel and look and represent, perhaps not in the context and not in this kind of architecture, but in somewhere more open, more not so, maybe somewhere more wild and not so contained. So our idea was to maybe perhaps build this channel or this bridge between, lava as this thing that will cast and mold and materialize living and lived organisms versus, an archive such as Asia Archive in America, but more so, in general, how it catalogs, collects, and organizes information within and around the border or definition of Asia. So we thought this sort of morphing and permeating definition around territories, around lands and landscape was interesting for us.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. Because the way you answered that actually really clicks for me, because a part of me thinks lava flows, but at a certain point it stops. And so there are these like geologic layers of things, and I guess it's in some ways attempting to tell us something about the way that area formed, but it's actually this kind of hardened thing. And what I thought was very interesting about how you answered this question is that you're actually talking about elasticity, both of the formation of both lava as well as the archive. I thought that was really interesting. A process-based question for you, because you did your lava research in 2022. Is that right? And have you continued to do volcanic research or research related to like volcanoes? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you ever think when you were doing your research that you might be working on a zine at some point? No. Okay. Yeah. Got it. That's interesting. Okay, the other thing I think that's very interesting about your zine is this tactility component. And I think when we first met online, I think I told you, I didn't know what the bag was. So if you take a look at Alchemyverse zine, it's in this like geologic sample bag, and I had to Google that to figure out what it was, because it has this little tag where you can write down what the specimen is, and I had to specifically like zoom in and then and Google like the name of the company that produces the bag, because I had no idea what that was. And so there's this element, as you said in your presentation, of this unfolding, which is similar also, I think, to Lulu's zine too. But with Alchemyverses, it's like you pull it out and there's this tactile situation, and then the laser engraving actually activates another sense. So for me, it activated this very strong smell. And it kind of like, to me, I first wasn't sure, it smelled like carbon, like burnt carbon a little bit, or like something like smoky wood, I guess. So what effects were you hoping to achieve through the activation of that other sense?
Well, yeah, I feel like the process of the smell for us is kind of the the connection of the gesture between the lava and also the archive. Because if you think about the laser carving, laser engraving like process, you think of a huge like light, and when they touch the paper, and started engraving the paper, burning out all the tissues of paper, actually leaving the mark by burning, and also the heat, which really just directly related to lava for sure. But also the way it leaves the mark. We think that's another part related to the archive.
Thanks for that. Sorry, did I cut you off?
No.
This is what happens when you have two people.
Yeah, this is the artist collective at work, everybody. Right? So thanks so much for that, right? Because there is this sense of mark making, particularly I think in your zine, that I think is quite interesting. And then so I guess in one of the quotes that you had, I think that you had utilized, it was something like, "If knowledge is not acquired but felt, what can lava teach us?" I think that was one of the questions you asked specifically in your zine. And I thought that was so interesting because that's very meta, because there were words in your zine in addition to this tactility, in addition to this kind of sensory experience. And so from what you've learned maybe in your field research as well as your research here, what do you think is your takeaway for what Asia Art Archive in America might do for it to be like better known as maybe Jenny? A similar question to what I asked for Jenny maybe, but
I think the most interesting characters we found while we were, spending time both with the people and also with, all the books and resources and objects here is that it's never ending. It's still growing, and I don't think, at least for us as as one students and then now artists and creators, it's not often or very prominent to witness an archive forming and being or becoming, and so to witness that process and to really become a part of that. Sort of behind the scene, and getting to know that was definitely the greatest experience for us at this residency, because we would have never known that how researchers label the boxes, how they found them at a certain collector's house, and how they label the collections based on the location of where they found them in the house. That was like, it sort of gave us an image, a scenario, and a whole sensorial feeling and connection to the collection. So I don't know. I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
did you also want to ask it? Okay. But that process of becoming, I think, is very interesting, and like that process, I think, is actually quite similar to the arc that like residencies take too, because there is a process by which you have to like set up your hypothesis, or you set up your thesis, your topic, or your area of interest, and you're diving into this research, but that changes over time as you're reflecting it in your artistic practice and output.
Yeah, I don't know. That's such a good question. I've never thought about that. I mean, it's really like I don't want to sound cheesy, but it's really like a family member, and you will get really, sometimes things will go really well, and sometimes you will argue, but you try to figure things out, and you never know what's going to be like. And you try to embrace that. I deeply enjoy the experience here. It's a place you can just walk in. If you have an idea on your mind, sit down. Nobody's gonna bother you. Or if you want to talk to the staff, they won't be shy to share their honest thoughts with you. So it's great. Yeah.
Awesome. Family member, love him. Sometimes not love him.
Sorry to sound cheesy, but
no, that makes sense.
I had to.
What about you, Lulu?
I guess I was thinking about it more as like the archive itself, and it would be a very
OCD hack rat, I guess. So someone who like takes a lot of things and then figures out how to make it look neat.
Oh, that's nice. So somebody who like Marie Kondo's life kind of thing, but also happens to collect lots of stuff too. Awesome. Okay, Alchemyverse. What about you?
I think of it as a mentor.
A mentor.
Yeah, very patient and kind.
Nice.
It's more like a grad student, a really good one for me, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like they all really like enthusiastic and also energetic all the time, and always want to grow bigger or, you know,
Very ambitious.
very ambitious. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. And that's so interesting that the two of you said something slightly different, right? Because Yushuan is saying like, hey, like it's a mentor, like, and there's like, then there's, when you say something like mentor, I think somebody who's a little older, who's a little wiser maybe, or who's experienced lots of stuff. And B-Chen's like, actually no, it's like a grad student, like really like really a peer, and like somebody who's like curious, and somebody who's like really excited to be in the world, which is awesome. Okay, last but certainly not least, what about you, Jenny?
This person is an international traveler. They're multilingual. They have many passports. Ultimately, though, they're based in hip Brooklyn. They're mysteriously but very well funded. But maybe they're a little introverted, and you know they have so much to offer. They have so much knowledge, and that you know they just need to get them out a little bit more. You know.
Yeah, thanks for that.
There you go.
And like that's kind of like, I love this idea of somebody who's like introverted but also wants to be in the world too. Like I think that's actually really neat. Okay, so I feel like we've been talking a lot, and we want to open it up to the floor. Questions, comments, concerns, feelings? Yes, Lauren, hey.
I have a question for the panel. How would you improve the collectability of the Asian art diaspora in the future?
That's a very good question. Who wants to take that first?
What do you mean by collectability?
People buying art.
But that's actually a very interesting question to define collectability. Yeah, but thanks for that. So, because you're right, I think collectability could refer to economic, right, viability.
Could be academic.
It could be academic, right? It could be raising awareness. It could be just generally sort of like connecting to sort of the diaspora and sort of like making network connections, like maybe Frank would say. How do we feel about that? How does the audience, I feel like there are like a lot of arts professionals and art world pros in the audience too. Like I don't want to like pass the buck, but I know we have some incredible professionals, so we should open it up. How should we do this?
I mean, I can say something
Yeah.
probably won't help, you know, but I consider that I'm a nomad. And nomadic subjectivity is actually one of the main topics in my works, you know, but I'm still trying to understand, you know, what does this mean as a Chinese diaspora, right, or you know, even digital diaspora, you know. So that's something that I want to look much deeper into and try to get a good idea of. And I think one of the things that I can think of is just how to approach it with an openness. It's very hard, of course, you know, because eventually you will need to have some curatorial structure, right, you know, and try to, hopefully it's not like a tree structure, but more like a rhizome, you know, with more flexibility and things like that. And that actually reconciles my, you know, the research I was doing in this project, you know. It's the same idea that when we approach technology, you know, what you take, what you don't. People tend to actually approach it in, you know, they tend to go to two extremes, you know, technology is really good or technology is really bad, right? But, you know, I think there's an in-betweenness, you know, and we have to approach it with just an openness. And that's just the way I look at it. I mean, exactly how to do it, I have no idea. It's obviously very hard.
Yes, I understand the importance of the question in terms of its relationship to archive, because the primary thing that an auction house looks for or a gallery looks for is provenance and the history of that work. And so that has been a big neglected area. So I understand that. But I have a different question, which is, I thought your question about what kind of person you view the archive as brilliant, because I came into the discussion of the archive in the 1990s, where it was very clear what the archive was. It was an authoritarian, dictatorial father figure that organized the world and imposed its worldview on you, pretty much a Western point of view.
Yes.
So what I'm really interested in is in their, like, each of these zines seem to be like reinventing an archive or commenting on the archive or opening up possibilities for the archive. And I wonder if there is something, can you inject Asian identity into the archive? Because the way I was raised, archive was what the West imposed on the rest of the world. But I'm very intrigued by the projects that these artists have done. So that's one.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about your question too. I don't know if this sounds opportunistic, but if we like take advantage of the fact that Asia is growing as in power in general, and because of that, the West is now having to pay attention to Asia and Asian art and Asian identity. I don't know how we can do it, but I think that there might be a way to just take advantage of the spotlight that's being put on Asia as which really hasn't been there for a long time.
So last comment, Summer, go ahead, Summer.
I was going to maybe continue the volleying back,
Sure.
Volleying back and forth between the couple of questions and possibly continuing the lack of clarity. Thank you. But also, thinking maybe of Barbara, your question about like the 1990s, again, the version of the archive, that as being very gendered and very like Western perspective at the time. But at the same time, like that's not the archive. That's who's reading the archive. So I also think like this idea that the archive does not have to be gendered. It does not have to be geographically specific in any way. It's the book. It is like I kind of want to look over. I'm sorry, Jennifer, correct? Yeah, I kind of want to look over at the librarian and maybe like give some kind of like nodding glance, like the archive's whatever you need it to be. It's just, and maybe thinking to what you were saying, Frank, about like the actual. It's the methodology. The archive has all these possibilities, and maybe like and so this idea of like coming back. Essentially, I am being paid by Asian art.
Thank you. Thank you. Self-disclosure. I love it. I love it.
Maybe kind of like trying to tie it in a bow for you or something. But it is all coming back like the archive. It's like this ultimate like expansion of possibilities as the cloud, as like this methodology, and as the library.
Mm-hmm. And thanks for that, Summer. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
Frank,
that gave me some idea.
you're going to have the last
Okay.
word. Go for it.
Sorry, I'll be quick. Just in response to Barbara's question, I think I think for me the answer might be in collaboration. How do you find a new way of collaborating with each other? It's like it's not just you cannot rely on the institution to do everything. It's your here and now. And as Asian artists, we situated right here. I was not born here. And how do you make your voice being heard? You have to work damn hard for it, of course. And at the same time find the right institutions to work together with who are willing to embrace your ideas. Maybe that's how I look at it.
Great, thanks so much for that, Frank. I feel like if we wanted to, we could potentially continue this conversation forever, but I do want to wrap it up. So again, thank you, artists. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.